Well, hello and welcome to the first day of our political tour of the US elections. Our destination is one of the most pivotal counties in the United States, Luzerne County. It lies in the blue-collar heartlands of northeast Pennsylvania, and it's thanks to this area and places like it that Donald Trump was able to take the White House in 2016. Tomorrow we'll be in Philadelphia, a Democratic stronghold, but today we're in Trump country. At least that's what it was in 2016. We've got a packed program for you here. On the ground in Lucerne, we have our correspondent Malcolm Brown. Hello, Malcolm. And here in the UK, we'll be providing an overview of the stats that make Lucerne so interesting. And standing by here, we have Professor Dave Swenson from Iowa State University to provide additional analysis. Hello, Dave.
Hello.
Later on in the program, you'll be able to put your questions direct to both Malcolm and one of the region's leading political commentators, Professor Thomas Baldino, retired recently from Wilkes University and who's spent 4 decades studying the politics of the county. But to start with, Malcolm has been out and about today and has this introduction to the county.
For the start of this road series, we've travelled to one of the handful of US states set to play a pivotal role in this election. We're in Pennsylvania, specifically right now on the banks of the North Branch of the Susquehanna River, which rises in New York and drains into the Chesapeake Bay in Maryland. Anyway, but back to Pennsylvania. This state has 20 electoral college seats up for grabs in this presidential race. Remember, the magic number is 270. That's the number of electoral college votes a candidate must reach in order to win the White House. Now, Pennsylvania was a state that hadn't backed a Republican since 1988. That is, until Donald Trump beat Hillary Clinton here 4 years ago, albeit by less than 1% of the vote. So we've brought you to one of the places which handed Mr. Trump that victory, Luzerne County in northeastern Pennsylvania. The county seat is here, the city of Wilkes-Barre, where this historic courthouse building now houses the county government. The city's population is just over 40,000. Sited on the Susquehanna, Wilkes-Barre was founded in 1769, but boomed in the 19th century following the discovery of anthracite coal. Since then, the area has fallen on harder times. With its industrial history and strong tradition of labor unions, this was safe Democratic territory for decades. But we've come here because of the very important role this county played in the 2016 election, making it an excellent place to see how the race between Donald Trump and Joe Biden stands with less than 3 weeks to go. So why Luzerne? Well, it voted for Barack Obama twice, but 4 years ago went for Donald Trump in a big way. He trounced Hillary Clinton in this county by 20 points. It was a big factor in his Pennsylvania win, which was in turn a major component of his stunning success nationally. In fact, Luzerne County has come to epitomize the trends that fueled Donald Trump's extraordinary win, propelled as it was by the support of white working-class voters. Jim Bognett is the Republican looking to unseat the Democrat currently serving in the US House of Representatives for this district. He's evidently looking for a repeat of 2016.
Around here, we used to win a lot.
Bognett's kick is up and it's good. Hazelton 10-7.
But things have changed. China cheated us on trade and sent us the Wuhan flu. Illegal immigrants took our jobs, spread crime, and sent taxpayers the bill. President Trump fights for us, but he needs teammates. I'm running for Congress to fight for the Trump agenda, build the wall, and put America first. I'm Jim Bognett, and I approve this message.
To get a sense of whether that message still resonates here as strongly as it did last time, we've come to the square at the heart of Wilkes-Barre. As you can see, it's market day on a beautiful autumn day. We're here to meet Tom Baldino, veteran expert on the Pennsylvania political landscape, who retired last year as Professor of Political Science at nearby Wilkes University, where he worked for nearly 3 decades.
In Pennsylvania at this moment, Biden continues to hold a sizable lead, even considering a margin of error of 2 to 4% or 3 to 4%, which suggests that he will win the state, right? He has managed to cut into parts of the Trump constituency that allowed Trump to win the state in 2016, by making large inroads in suburban, white, college-educated women in the state, particularly in southeastern Pennsylvania, where Philadelphia is, and out west in Pittsburgh, which is in Allegheny County. Those are two parts of the state that have seen population increases, significant population increase, while the rural parts of the state, and in particular Luzerne County, has witnessed population stagnation or in fact outright decline.
For Republicans here, much will depend on whether they can replicate the numbers, perhaps exceed the numbers and the enthusiasm of 4 years ago. Early this morning, I put that to John Lombardo, chairman of Young Republicans in the county. John, thanks so much for joining us. Less than 3 weeks to go. How are you feeling about the way things are going?
I'm feeling pretty confident that President Trump is going to win the election. You know, there's been quite a lot going on with the election over the last couple of weeks, couple of months. So I'm excited. I'm excited, basically.
Sure, you say confident, but President Trump, according to most of the battleground polls, suggests that he's behind in several key states, including Pennsylvania. You think those polls are wrong?
Yeah, I do think they're wrong. I mean, we saw in 2016 there was a major difference in what happened in the polls and what actually, you know, occurred in reality. And I think that, you know, we have to look at exactly who they're polling and what their, you know, what the nature of the poll is, because a lot of time, you know, polling agencies will poll registered voters and not likely voters, and that'll, you know, make a shift of who actually votes and what's going to happen. However, I will say that there's going to be quite a few first-time voters this year, and the Republican Party in the country has a major shift in people that are first-time registered voters versus Democrats. I think the Democrats are actually losing quite a few voters, and the Republicans have gained, I know in Pennsylvania they gained over 160,000.
Well, thanks very much for that, Malcolm. That was a very interesting report. We're going to look at the numbers now, and we've got some slides just to run through some of the demographics, the voting patterns, as well as the sort of the ethnic breakdown of Lucerne, which all helps to give us a better picture of what's going on. So let's just bring up those slides now. And I also on hand we do have Professor Thomas Baldino with us. So we'll pull him in, which is wonderful to have him there with us to give us a bit more analysis. So there's Luzerne County in the top in the northeastern area of Pennsylvania. Tomorrow we'll be in Philadelphia. Let's just go on to the next slide. All these stats come from the census last year, I believe. You can see Luzerne County there, population 317,000, right next to Lackawanna County, which is where Joe Biden comes from. He famously hails from Scranton, and the Democrats are banking on the idea that he will try and firm up, or at least hold back some of the blue collar support that Trump was able to win over in such large numbers last time. Let's just go on to the next slide. And here we see the age and also the ethnicity. Now, Tom Baldino, can you just tell us a bit about this? I mean, is Luzerne an outlier? How typical is it of these sort of more rural, small town areas of Pennsylvania? I don't know if Thomas can...
Luzerne County, for at least the last... Can you hear me? So yes, Luzerne County, at least since the 70s or 80s, has been among the oldest counties in the United States. And the figures that you're seeing on the screen right now support the fact that the county's population is aging. The younger folks here, especially those who pursue a college degree, many end up leaving the area because there aren't the kind of good paying jobs that would support or attract actually employers who would want to hire college graduates. And so the younger population with college degrees leaves, which then ties into why this county tends to have an average education, which is below the state average and the national average. Fewer people here have college degrees. So yeah, this is an older population, and as your few others, well, you've got it there, it's a very white population, relatively small groups of non-white people.
Right. Okay. Well, let's just go on to the next one. I mean, we'll see. I think the Hispanic population there was 14%. I think the African American population was down at 4%. So it is very, very white compared to other areas, and certainly the US average. Here we've got incomes. We won't spend too much time on this, but per capita income just under $30,000. Let's just go on to the next slide. And here, this is what you were referring to earlier, Thomas. And I think the US average for college education is around 35%. And do you see this as the big cleavage here? Is that the idea of people who haven't had college? I mean, you talked about it just earlier, people leaving with college degrees.
Yes. And as someone who's taught in one of the schools of higher education here, it's very frustrating when the graduates must leave the area and or leave the state to find employment. It's not unusual, especially the students who graduate with education degrees, to be unable to find employment in this county or Lackawanna County or any of the nearby counties, because those areas are actually closing schools. The senior teachers stay on until retirement, obviously, and then there are often vacancies that are left, positions left unfilled. So many of the students that I taught end up teaching in Virginia or South, because that's where the teaching positions are, and students will go there. When there was more of a demand for engineers in this area because there were manufacturing jobs and or whatever technical positions, those have kind of dried up. And I was talking to Malcolm about this earlier. The kinds of jobs that are in the area now and where there is some job growth are in warehouse and distribution centers because of the intersection of interstates 80 and 81 here, two major interstate arteries. From that intersection, which is actually about 15 minutes from where we're sitting, one truck can reach 40% of the population here in 12 hours or less. So the distribution centers in this area make sense. But those jobs don't require more than a high school education. They start out at about $15 an hour, and the salaries don't go up much from there.
Yeah, and there's been some tech growth in the county and nearby, but that doesn't employ the kind of people who lost their jobs in the last 10, 15 years or so.
No, it doesn't.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's go on to the next slide. And this is where we see what happened in the last two elections. Can you just run through this for us, Thomas? I mean, what's happening here? We look at those light blue areas turning red from 2012 when they voted for Obama, and then moving across to Trump in 2016. What did you see what was the reading of the main reasons for that? I mean, people feeling left behind, people feeling as though that the Democrats just really didn't offer them something.
So the three counties that are circled from 2012 to 2016, Erie on the upper left-hand corner, Luzerne, and then to the south and right of it is Northampton. They had voted for Obama twice and are generally considered solidly Democratic counties. But in 2016, there was a confluence of events. I would say first, Clinton did not appeal to the Democrats in these counties. The Democratic Party that exists as it is in the rural parts of the state or in the less urban parts of the state tend to be conservative Democrats, socially conservative. They support government spending when that spending is coming to them directly or promotes jobs in the county, but they are pro-life, pro-guns, and not terribly enthusiastic about having immigrants coming into their communities. Right? Clinton personified everything that the Democratic Party had become by 2016, a party that appeared to be appealing to liberals, very liberal people on the East and West Coast who wanted to take guns away from people, who supported immigration, pro-choice, pro-abortion. And so the Democratic Party here, or Democratic voters here, fled to Trump. That was one thing. Second, Clinton did not run a very good campaign. I mean, she had connections to Lackawanna County. Her father's side of the family grew up there. She had a grandfather who died and was buried there, and her father was brought back and buried in Lackawanna County. She barely came to this area in the lead up to, in fact, I think she came once. Surrogates came in lieu of her visits here. So her strategy to win votes in Pennsylvania was poor, and that's, I think, being generous. And then third, and I mentioned this earlier to Malcolm, the Democratic Party organization in the county, Luzerne County, was weakened. And so leading up to 2016, the organization itself did not deliver in the way it should have done by having people stationed at precincts to hand out party literature. That was non-existent practically throughout the entire county. And at least in terms of Luzerne County, that was an important factor. Erie, I think, if we're projecting ahead a bit, of the three counties, Erie and Northampton are much more likely to flip back to the Democrats, primarily because of Joe Biden. He appeals to people who Clinton alienated, but I'm predicting that Luzerne County will stay Republican.
Wow, okay. The next slide shows us the weighting of votes within Pennsylvania, and we can see how much that bastion of Philadelphia provides the Democrats with a huge amount of votes. So the challenge for the Democratic Party is to try and limit the number of people coming out to support Trump in Lackawanna or Luzerne. So in a way, I guess, you know, if I think it was 60,000 votes that he won the state by, is that right?
44.
44. Well, there we go. If they can limit the number of votes just by a small number, that would be a significant impact. So I think let's pull out of the slides now. Malcolm very kindly got hold of the head of the Democratic Party in Luzerne County, and she says that they've been getting a lot of support. She herself is new to the party, and she outlines here in a couple of clips from the interviews just done the challenge that they have coming up now. So if we can just bring those clips up now, that would be wonderful. Isabel.
We have seen people who have not engaged, been engaged in a political campaign coming in every day saying, how can we help? How can I volunteer? Can I give you a $20 donation? I was not involved in the party in 2016 at all. I resolved to get involved with the party because of the election of Donald Trump. When Pennsylvania flipped that night, I turned off the television and went to bed and lay there saying, I think the next 4 years will bring horrible things for our nation because of Donald Trump's approach to it and some of his policies, and my fears have been exceeded at this point. And as I lay there in bed that night, I said, I've got to get involved somehow. And 4 years later, here I am, the chair. I had never really been politically involved before. But there are a lot of people like me who are very much involved, and those who have been longtime party members say they haven't seen this level of enthusiasm for a candidate and a campaign since Obama 2008, and that's saying a lot.
Okay, so that's Kathy Brzezinski, who's chair of the party, but I think the key thing she's got to say is the next clip, which really says that they don't have to do a hell of a lot in order to win Pennsylvania based on 2016's figures. Let's just play that clip.
I like to say I'm shooting for the stars, but if I hit the moon, that works too. We're in it to win it. We would love to flip Luzerne County to the palest of blue, but we don't have to for Joe Biden to be successful statewide. If we peel off some of those voters, if we bring out some of the voters who did not come out for Hillary in 2016 and even close that gap or equal it from 2016, then that becomes a winning combination statewide in Pennsylvania for Joe Biden.
Okay. The figures show at the moment, I think, what are the latest figures on polling for statewide, Thomas? Are they about, is it between 6 and 9%, I think you said earlier in your clip.
Yeah, he's, depending on which poll, but I think on average, he's holding between 6 and 8% lead. And I think he's going to win the state. And I say that assuming there aren't significant legal challenges, which there will be, but also if the efforts by the Republican Party to get people to go to the polls, Republicans to go to the polls, to act as poll watchers who then end up intimidating voters. That's a real concern. And whether all the mail-in ballots will be counted appropriately, how many will be challenged and tossed. We know that Pennsylvania Democratic voters are requesting mail-in ballots in much larger numbers than those than the Republicans. So if everything happens to go perfectly for the Democrats, this should be an easy state for Biden to win. But who knows? Right? I happen to think that this is going to be tighter by election night, but I still think Biden could win. Not could, he will, he should win. Okay?
Right. I mean, I guess the question in the back of everyone's mind is, how did the polls get it wrong last time, and could they make the same mistake this time?
Okay, so having done polling in Luzerne County and know how to weight for certain populations, as I understand, the national polls got the outcome correctly. They predicted Hillary Clinton would win the national popular vote, but the polls in the state races didn't account for the larger number of voters who were not college educated. They underweighted non-college educated voters, particularly white non-college educated voters. And as the gentleman, Lombardo, the young Republican, mentioned, there has been an uptick in terms of numbers of Republican registrations and numbers of Democrats who were registered Democrats switching to the Republican Party. I do not see the Republicans squeezing out more new Republican voters. I think it's quite likely that, as Ms. Baczynski said, there will be, because of the increased interest, there will be many more Democrats who either sat out the 2016 election because they didn't like Clinton, or voted for Trump because they didn't like Clinton. So I don't expect that Biden will carry, as I said, Luzerne County, but the 58-38 difference between, 58-38 or thereabouts, that Trump won as opposed to Clinton, I expect that will be much narrower. I expect that Trump, if he's fortunate, he might pull 54%, but it could easily be down at 52%. And so those few extra thousand votes help Biden win the state.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of counties where Biden is picking up support from people who have either turned off to Trump or had sat out the election altogether in 2016.
In a moment, Tom, I'd love you to come back to talk about the recent elections that give us an indication of who's gained support more recently, the midterms, those kind of races. So we'll come back to that in just a second. But just to give everyone a flavor of how important Pennsylvania has become, we're going to play some of the adverts that both sides are deploying in Pennsylvania. Those budgets have been moved from elsewhere. So the advertising that was in Wisconsin, for example, has been moved to Pennsylvania. And our first advert is one by the Republican Party targeting Biden. Here we go.
This country needs a leader, and leaders change attitudes about people.
Under Biden's leadership, Northeast Pennsylvania lost nearly 20,000 jobs. Sold us out to China, where Biden's family made billion-dollar deals. Sold out to Pelosi, too. His plan cost families $4,500 a year on average. Trillions to finance her wish list.
This country needs a leader.
Not a sellout like Biden. Club for Growth Action is responsible for the content of this advertising.
So that advert was actually being deployed in Luzerne specifically. It's showing you how important that area is there. And then in response, we've got two Democratic adverts coming up, one that targets Trump nationally, and then one more specifically in Pennsylvania. So let's play the first one, which is about COVID.
You see what happens when you get off to a late start.
Are the words about a pandemic?
No, we're not at all, and we have it totally under control. I've always known this is a pandemic. It's a little like the regular flu. It's not the flu. It's vicious. We have it so well under control. If you don't mind death, a lot of death. 100,000 people, that's at a minimum number. You see what happens when you get off to a late start.
All the lost time has cost lives.
Thomas, that really must have undermined the Republican vote. It must in some way be damaging Trump. It seems to be affecting him elsewhere among similar communities.
Are you directing that at me? I'm sorry.
Yeah.
So yes, the virus, the pandemic, is a serious issue here in the county. We had a significant, especially back March, April, May, large numbers of cases, large numbers of deaths, relatively speaking, for a county of our population. But I would say that even more important than the virus, although it's hard to not say that the virus is an important issue, healthcare, okay? Because of the elderly population and the healthcare industry as it is in this county is one of the largest employers. I think the stability of the healthcare system, especially as it relates to Obamacare, is a major issue. And obviously employment and jobs, as the Republican ad suggested.
Right, okay.
Those are issues that people around here really take seriously.
Okay. Please, everyone, can you start putting your questions in the box below here? We'll get Malcolm and Dave to join in the discussion very shortly. We've just got one more advert to play, and this really is sort of targeting the former Trump supporters that the Democrats want to win back.
I've spent better than half my life, most of my adult life, in the military, under oath, serving my country. 2016, I voted for Donald Trump. Really, one of the things that's happened under Donald Trump is we've abandoned the truth. He's shown that he can't be trusted. Our failed response to the pandemic has cost us business. That's going to cost us jobs. It's going to hurt our economy. And it's going to hurt us as a nation. Millions of Americans who are trying to figure out how they're paying the rent, how they're feeding their families, because Donald Trump again failed. He takes tough decisions, but he's not capable of making tough decisions. I'm still Republican, and I will be voting for Biden this November. He'll put the needs of the nation first. You want a commander-in-chief you can trust. And I think you can trust Joe Biden. I think he actually loves the country. Joe Biden is the first Democrat I'll vote for president.
AB PAC is responsible for the content of this ad.
Okay, great. One thing I was reading, I think it was Politico again, was making the distinction between Trump supporters and Republicans and saying they're not necessarily the same thing, and that you'll have people coming out to vote for Trump who haven't previously done in previous elections. Because in the midterms and also with the Senate race, the Democrats have been doing better. Is that right, Thomas?
Yes. If I may just make one comment on the last advertisement, that's a very effective ad for this particular county in this area because there are so many veterans. Literally, there are still World War II veterans in this county. And then there are Korean, Vietnam, you name it. If was a conflict, people here served in that conflict. And so having a strong commander-in-chief is something that does play well. Now, to your point about the midterm elections, the midterm election was different for Pennsylvania, primarily because the U.S. congressional districts were redrawn under court order. Okay? And so the Democrats actually picked up, 4 seats, okay? It had been 13-5, and it went 9-9, okay? And so the Democrats also did better in statewide state offices. So at the same time that the midterm congressional elections were being held, the Democrats held on to the Attorney General's office, picked up the Auditor General's office and the Treasurer's office. People were splitting their ticket. Well, there wasn't a president at the top of the ticket, but Democrats were doing well. So that that suggests that in a statewide race, all things being equal, Joe Biden should do reasonably well.
Okay. We're going to start bringing in some question now. Stuart Williams is there, so we'll bring Stuart's question in there to start with. But I'm just going to switch to Malcolm here. Just in watching the sort of news coverage of it, I presume that it's COVID that is the main issue. How much has the battle for the Supreme Court taken people's imagination? And have you seen any evidence of people, talking to people today? Has that come up at all in your conversations?
I sense it's probably followed more closely in this county than maybe in some other places. This seems a pretty heavily Catholic. There's a large Catholic population here. And given that issue and the prospect or the potential for, at some future date, conservatives managing to achieve what they've long wanted, which is the striking down of the Roe versus Wade decision, I think that probably does resonate quite a lot here. It's also given Joe Biden one of the more difficult areas of what for him has been a relatively easy campaign, where he has refused to take a position on whether or not he would, in Republican terms, pack the court, i.e. add justices to the Supreme Court after the election. He sort of wiggled a little bit because his position's been pretty unsustainable. He's essentially said that will be a distraction. It's a hypothetical, but there's been lots of criticism that you really can't maintain that position for long if you want to take the top job in the land. So he's had to sort of express some position which indicates he doesn't love the idea of adding to the Supreme Court, but he hasn't taken a definitive position on it. So yeah, it's been a tricky issue, and I do think it probably resonates quite a lot here.
Okay, Stuart Williams, I think you're going to throw a cat among the pigeons. Stuart, do you want to go ahead and ask your question? Just need to, there you go, Stuart. Hello? Your mic's open.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, go on.
Yeah, I'm sort of getting these links to the New York Post story about Hunter Biden and apparent influence peddling during the time his father was vice president with Obama, which suggests that Joe Biden's not as squeaky clean as one might hope. And I wondered whether this is going to have any influence on the voters, or whether it's I don't know, whether it's just accepted that they're all crooks up in Washington. So what's the difference?
Right, Professor Baldino, Thomas, can you? I don't know if you heard all of that, but I think you heard most of it.
Yes. It's actually a story, a rumor that's been debunked. Yes, Hunter Biden did have a position with Burisma in Iran, in Ukraine, and he did have business dealings in China, but the kind of claims made in the New York Post story are fairly outlandish. The timing of the release of this is obviously to create some kind of October surprise, as we say here, to perhaps pull some votes away from Biden. It depends on how much play that gets beyond the New York Post. I know that the New York Times has already had a story about it, but whether it has legs, whether it has staying power, remains to be seen. Obviously, I'm sure that this is going to be replayed and discussed ad nauseum on Fox News and on the conservative websites and the like, but among Democratic voters, that's not much of a story. The few who might be peeled away from Biden, I don't know, we'll see about that. There will be an opportunity for Biden this evening to respond to that if it comes up in his town hall. right?
Okay.
So
Thomas, what do you see as the defining issues then of the election in Luzerne and the areas around it? So you talked about healthcare. Essentially, that's related to COVID. So what do you see as people's top priorities?
All right. So the handling of the pandemic and healthcare, let's put that together. That is probably the top issue. But then the economy and jobs. This area has never been, I shouldn't say never. It's been a long time since this area has had a booming economy. Even during the best years, during the first part of the Trump administration, which coming out of the Obama administration, the economy here was improving. It continued to improve under Trump. Then the pandemic hit. But even as it was improving, this is the point, Luzerne County lagged the state, and the state lagged the nation in terms of total jobs and average income. You know, despite the booming economy, average incomes in the United States for the typical worker did not keep pace. You know, there's this income gap that's growing between the wealthiest and everyone else. And that's even more dramatic in Luzerne County, right? Wages here have not risen. There are more jobs, more people are holding jobs, more people with 2 jobs actually. But in terms of how that has benefited people financially overall, not great. So people want better paying jobs. I'm not sure if they're ever going to see them here.
Essentially what you're saying is that you blame the government for it. So it doesn't matter really who's in government. They're going to get, people are going to vote against them.
Well, that could be, yes. It's really difficult to, of course, this is a point that I used to make in my classes, is that the presidents like to claim that they're responsible for booming economies. They never want to take responsibility for declining economies. But in fact, presidents really don't influence the economy directly that often or at all. So that's the way it is, right?
Okay. We're going to go to Caroline Sumnall in just a second, but I want to get Dave Swenson to come in here. If we look at Luzerne County as a barometer for similar communities across the states, you know, Trump has got to win, got to retain the support of these white working class communities. How do you see it playing out elsewhere, Dave? What are the signs thus far?
Well, Luzerne County is objectively very, very similar to many of the counties across the Midwest that did flip from 2016 over 2012. Luzerne County is a little bit older. It's a little bit whiter. It's a little bit less educated. It's a little bit less prosperous. It's maybe has more people who are disabled. It maybe has even more people who don't have health insurance. And most of those places actually were doing a little better in 2016 than they were in 2012. Yet they flipped very hard. So if you looked at everything that I just ran out and you used it as a variable and a multiple regression analysis to try to pick the voters, and I'm not being technical here, the strength of those variables is significantly different this time than it seems that they were last time. And so what I see with this county, I see a lot of what I saw in other counties, again, especially in the Midwest, that led to this sharp pull from one candidate to the other. And in that case, of course, it was towards Trump. What does it mean in terms of other places? I'm hearing very much the same story being played out in other places here in the Midwest, that whether it is Wisconsin or Michigan or Iowa or Illinois and parts of Illinois, where these mid-sized places have lost a lot of that edge with regard to the potency of their vote, their GOP vote. And that's what I'm expecting to see as we move through here. This has been very, very interesting, because what it's done is through the reporting and then through the insights of Tom, I'm getting validation for what we're seeing when we read and watch what's going on across the United States.
Okay, thanks very much indeed for that, Dave. Let's bring in Caroline Sumnall. Go ahead, Caroline.
How much of the riots impacted is one question. And also, hi, Dave. Good to see you again. So, Dave, I'm going to ask you who's going to win as well.
Dave, do you want to deal with that one first, and then we'll go to Thomas?
I'm a social scientist. I read the polls. I discern very carefully the strength of the measurements. I do all of those things the way I'm supposed to, and Biden's going to win. Okay.
All right. Okay. Tom, go ahead. The riots. I mean, this is really interesting for us because tomorrow we go to Philadelphia. We will be seeing people who have been involved in Black Lives Matter. This is a huge election for them. The African-American turnout is going to be significant. And the violence that's followed on from some of those protests has been significant. And I guess has scared smaller, more conservative communities.
Oh, that's a really good question. And there have been demonstrations, Black Lives Matter demonstrations in our county in Wilkes-Barre on Public Square where we stood, I sat, and they've been peaceful. There hasn't been any violence that I can say of any significance that I know of. So even though locally we've not experienced violence of any kind really in these demonstrations, there is a certain vicarious connection that people have to seeing the violence that went on in Seattle and Portland and other places. And this is an area that is very much a law and order kind of an area. So there are some voters who will be concerned about whether or not Biden will be tough on crime. And he has made his public statements that peaceful protest is fine, but he doesn't condone violent protests. I don't think he can say any more about it without alienating African-American voters. And it's a tough position for him. But as David said, Biden's going to win and win the state of Pennsylvania. And he should win nationally, but we'll wait and see on that.
Yeah, very interesting. Yesterday, we had a discussion with the executive director of the Republican Party in Wisconsin and a political strategist in the party as well. And they basically said that COVID has drowned out the law and order debate that existed, 3-4 weeks ago. And now that's dissipated. And the fact that Trump himself has become ill really means that the focus has moved on and they've lost what traction they had with that.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Yes.
Okay, well, let's bring in Lynn Maddock. If Lynn, you're there, it's very early in the morning. What time is it with you, Lynn?
Oh, it's quite civilized, Nicholas. It's 8:30 now.
8:30. Oh, so easy. We're too kind to you. We're too kind to you. Go on, Lynn.
The Republican official talked about, I think, about increasing new registrations. Is that claim accurate compared to the Democrats? Is that claim accurate, and does it matter if they've got more new registration?
Go on, Tom.
No, he correctly stated that the number of new Republican registrations is up, and the number of Democrats switching to Republican is greater than the number of Republicans switching to Democrats. Yet, still gain a voter registration edge in the state. I'm not exactly sure what the number is now, but it had been like 400,000 or 500,000 vote difference in registration edge. It's probably less than that. Obviously, it's less than that now, but still in the hundreds of thousands. So there's plenty of room for some voters who are registered Democrats to vote for Trump. But I also anticipate, as do others, that Biden will pick up Republicans who haven't changed their registration. For example, white Republicans, suburban wives with college degrees, those folks are more likely to vote for Biden than Trump. And I can also throw this out as another social scientist, right? There was one of the statewide polling organizations is at Franklin and Marshall College. I know the gentleman who runs that poll. He did 2 surveys 15 years apart and asked people, how are they registered? What party do they feel more affiliated with, and how they actually vote? And it's common in Pennsylvania for people who are more common in Pennsylvania for people who are registered Democrats to vote Republican. by 4 or 5%. Okay, so even in this, I think helps describe Luzerne County. Even though it had it still has a Democratic registration voter reg, Republicans can win here, right? So how people are registered doesn't necessarily predict how exactly they're going to vote here.
Yeah, okay. Nigel Harley, we'll bring you in, and then we've got Graham Fry after that. Go ahead, Nigel.
Yes, I was just really wondering how the presence of Kamala Harris on the ticket would play in Pennsylvania. I mean, given that it's a very, as you say, it's a conservative, it's a largely white state, or generally a white state, and obviously, as we all know, the choice of vice president has taken on particular significance given Joe Biden's age.
Well, there are two things going on here, two electorates, and I mean, Malcolm, maybe you could start with this, and then we'll go to Tom as well. I mean, Kamala Harris presumably is going to be a big hit in Philadelphia.
Yes, she's definitely energizing the African American community, and also, as a sidebar, the South Asian Indian American community is also very jazzed. She sort of straddles those two worlds. But I think it's pretty clear that they're conscious, that the Dems are conscious of trying to make her more appealing as possible to more conservative areas. Her questioning in the Senate, she came in remotely during the hearings for the new Supreme Court justice, was much more toned down than it was the last time she was doing this in person, where the questions were much more pointed, and she was known very much for her sort of aggressive prosecutorial style, which was pretty unsparing of the witness in front of her. This was a different look for her, and clearly an attempt to make her more palatable to a middle America.
Thomas, this could be, well, she might be the next, the next but one president of the United States. So are people looking at that with, is that swaying people's vote, do you think?
Definitely, yes. I don't, typically the vice presidential candidate isn't that important, right? But because she is a woman and a woman of color, that will definitely help the ticket in the more progressive parts of the state. The southeastern corner and Allegheny County, and maybe Westmoreland County a little bit out there. But as far as driving voters to the Democratic ticket here in Luzerne County, probably not as much. If anything, it will help energize Democrats who sat out 2016, right? Because again, Hillary Clinton did not appeal to Democrats, the conservative Democrats here. Biden-Harris is more likely to generate the kind of interest that we didn't see in 2016.
I've got to say this. We saw Biden campaigning in Iowa. We saw him speak in Des Moines, and everybody on that tour thought this man is not going to be able to last the presidential campaign. He just didn't look fit enough. It's ironic in a way that Biden is seen as the safe bet. I mean, Dave, do you want to comment on that?
Well, I don't know that he's a safe bet, but everything is by virtue of comparison. And we have two elderly gentlemen running for president who both give us contrasts in behaviors. And whether Biden during the caucuses looked as vibrant and energized as some of the other candidates, well, he didn't, and he didn't have as much turnout, and he didn't have as much enthusiasm in the state of Iowa. What happened later, though, systematically created a candidate, and I think people might argue that Biden has been slowly rising to the occasion, especially as he moved into the primaries after Iowa. So, again, he's our candidate right now, and what we have is the contrast between the two in terms of both vitality, intellect, and demeanor.
Right.
Just to build on Dave's point, if I could, Nick, I mean, you can make the argument, I think, plausibly, that the Republican strategy vis-a-vis Biden has somewhat backfired because they portrayed him as so doddering, decrepit, with potential mental degeneration. They were giving, medical terms for what the various stages of dementia that they were arguing he was in, that when he was able in a debate to actually stand up and utter a couple of sentences in basic sequential order, that seems so dissonant with the message that the Republicans have been spinning that actually he looked quite good in comparison. So I think maybe their PR has somewhat backfired in that department.
Okay. Graham Fry. Graham, you've got a question.
Hang on, let me just turn myself on.
There you go. You're there.
Oh, I'm there. How big an issue immigration is in Pennsylvania, and particularly in Luzerne County. But there's a fascinating article this morning by Jana Ganesh, who's the Financial Times correspondent in the US, saying that one of the big issues for populists everywhere is immigration. But COVID seems to have taken the sting out of that in terms that borders are closed. It's suddenly not there anymore. And is this kicking out one of the legs from the stool from the whole, particularly the Trump agenda and the Republican agenda? And I was just interested in what you guys thought about that.
Graham, I think it's a really good question. Thomas, can you talk about the next city down from Wilkes-Barre, which I think has got a bigger Hispanic population, and that certainly was a factor in 2016, wasn't it?
Yes, that's the city of Hazleton. The city of Hazleton was pretty much dying for lack of people in the beginning of the 1990s, and then an influx, migration actually from New York City of from 1,000, actually, I think it's, but with that came crime. And so who gets blamed for the increase in crime? The immigrants. Right now is an issue. Immigration still kind of lurks in the background, but the pandemic, as was already noted, has kind of drowned that out. Sadly, maybe this is obvious, but immigration is associated with race, right? And the latent racism in the background, below the surface, that has appeared on occasion in this area. We still have an active, I shouldn't say active, but the Klan is here, and there are skinheads here and all those kinds of far-right groups. One of the things that motivates those folks, immigration, because the people who they see as coming in are not white. So it's that immigration / racial component that for some people drives them to vote for Trump.
That's absolutely fascinating. So really, COVID's a distraction. These are long-term issues, and they're not going to go away, Thomas.
No. In fact, regardless of who wins this election, but certainly if it's Biden, the serious racial divisions, and even in this county, which doesn't have relatively speaking, doesn't have a large population of people of color, that is a concern, right? Trump has legitimized racism, and you heard him talk about the poor boys and the boogaloo boys, and just stand up and stand back and all that. Those cues to those groups just gives them courage that, oh yeah, what we're doing has a champion in the White House, and if he were to be removed, if he is defeated, there's a very good chance that those folks aren't going to go away, right? Yeah. And that's sad. Serious.
I think there's certainly room for a discussion about what's going to happen to the Republican Party after this election if Trump does lose it, and also if he remains in power. We've got about another sort of 6 or 7 minutes to go of this before we have our own internal discussion. So please do, if you want to put some more questions to the panelists, please do put them in the Q&A box below here, and then we can bring you up and put those questions to people. Malcolm, just as a reminder to everyone, this is our first program in the series of 6 or 7, if you count our last program before on the eve of the elections. And the crucial thing about today is that this focuses at the community, at blue collar supporters of Trump. Sorry, I've just got a slight distraction here. Of blue-collar supporters of Trump that he has to retain. And we're going to be going through different communities over during the next 5 broadcasts that we've got. Just tell us about Philadelphia to start with. What are we going to be doing tomorrow?
Well, we're going to be tapping in really to find out what that Philadelphia, when you look at those election maps, you know, the whole swathe of Philadelphia, which is a curiously rectangular state, but I mean, most of it is red in these races. And if you were just to go by those colors, you would think, how could anybody in the blue camp, the Dems, ever win here? And the answer is they do it in these large population centers, of which Philadelphia is key, and obviously Pittsburgh too. So the question there is the African American community energized? Will they turn up for this Biden-Harris ticket? There's obviously indications that they will and that they are energized, but there are problems too for the Biden-Harris ticket. Joe Biden's past position on criminal justice is problematic. It's a sticky issue for him. He's got a long record in the Senate, which can go on. He sided with a tough position on crime, which was deeply unpopular and hasn't aged well in the African American community. Kamala Harris, herself a former state prosecutor, so not necessarily deeply resonant with that community, more conservative than maybe many of the activists in that community would want. So those are the kind of questions that we're looking to raise there.
Great. Okay, well, I'm really looking forward to that. We've got a few more questions coming in now. We've got Neil Fleming in Australia, who was on our 2016 tour of the States. Neil, what's your question? We can see you. Your microphone should be open. I can't apparently, open your microphone again. Just open your microphone. At the moment, your microphone appears to be off. I'm going to ask I can see your question here. So go on, Neil, try again now. Okay, we can't hear you. So I'm going to ask your question for you, but also we'll just have to wave. So the question is, has Trump in 4 years created sufficient manufacturing jobs and sustained sufficient agricultural jobs, as he's promised to do, to retain enough support in Pennsylvania? Thomas, this is a really interesting question. Before COVID, trade wars really did affect these two areas. And I think Trump did try and provide a lot of additional support to manufacturing and to farmers, but has it been sufficient? Can you just give us a bit of background on that, Thomas?
So manufacturing in this area has not come back. Coal mining has not come back. He promised to bring back coal mining. No, not happening. Natural gas, however, through fracking, hydraulic fracturing, that is still an important extractive industry here, and especially north of us. And in the western part of the state, where there is also natural gas in the Marcellus Shale Formation, the Shell Oil Corporation is building, or has nearly finished constructing, a fracturing plant, or a cracking plant that takes the gas and turns it into plastics and other things. So that's a plant that expects to, I don't know, maybe 1,000 jobs out there once it's up and running. So that's a major advantage. Agriculture here has actually suffered a bit. The trade war with China hurt a big industry, not so much around here, but in the southwestern corner, mushrooms, right? Interestingly, we don't export as many mushrooms as we used to in Pennsylvania, and that was an important crop. Apples and things like that, which are more south central part of the state, still important, but not exporting them much. This is not the same kind of agricultural state that one would find, say, in Iowa, right? But agriculture, I think, is identified as the broadly defined as the second largest industry in the state. But the manufacturing jobs, those industries that are growing or that have gained jobs are pharmaceuticals and tech jobs, right? There are tech jobs, software things in the Philadelphia area and out in Pittsburgh because of the universities that are located in those two large cities.
That really leads me on to the question: if and you all seem to be saying that Trump is, he's losing in Pennsylvania. He's not retaining enough of those blue collar votes. Malcolm, where can he gain more of those votes? I'd love to get all of your opinions on this. Where else can the Republicans get votes? And they're trying to shore them up, obviously there, but where else can they gain more votes if they're going to lose them there? Malcolm?
Well, they're going to be hoping, I think, that what happened last time also applies, that there is a sort of hidden Trump vote, which dare not speak its name, and that there is a sort of portion of the population that either conceals its support for Trump because they know it's controversial, or just downplays it. So they're going to be looking for that. But I mean, to a large extent, the Trump campaign hasn't really looked, from day one, hasn't really looked to expand its base. And it's remained remarkably static throughout the entire Trump presidency within a pretty small band. The strategy seems more in line with trying to make sure that the base is energized and will turn up. And Dems would argue that it also relies in part on discouraging the opposition from, well, elements of the opposition from going out to vote. There have been some reports that fake Twitter accounts that are said to represent African-American voters who say that they're disaffected with the Dems were found to be fake. You know, so it is argued on the Dem side there's an active voter disincentivization program on the part of the Republicans. So, I mean, seems to be more of the strategy than actually reaching out to independents actively, although you know, they'd welcome the support, but that doesn't appear to be a very visible part of the strategy.
Yeah, we're going to be looking at the actual voting and how some of that's being frustrated, and the concern over what's happening with the post being delayed in some places, perhaps by only a day or so, but enough to concern some people. Dave, do you have any additional thoughts on that? Do you think there are other areas? I mean, do you agree with what Malcolm was saying?
Well, I do agree with what Malcolm was saying, but I also want to flip it around and note that from my observation of the campaign, the Trump campaign has been working very, very hard to excite its core, but it looks to me like it has also systematically alienated a lot of people who had been willing to vote for Trump 4 years ago, and that's very, very evident in a lot of places. So, and that's just by virtue of some of the statements that are being made, and or the way that the campaign seems to be emphasizing issues and or people. And so I don't know about being able to pull people in, but stop driving people out seems to be perhaps one of the bigger issues for that campaign.
Yeah. Okay. And Thomas, is that fair? Do you agree with that?
Yes, and I would say that the Trump constituency is hemorrhaging senior citizens. And you don't want to lose senior citizens in a county like Luzerne, which is older, right? And college-educated women, a group that Trump did reasonably well with in 2016, he's losing them in a serious way. So instead of, as has been noted, expanding his base, trying to expand the number of people who would vote for him, he's focused intensely on his core constituency, and it's actually hurt him with some of those people who helped elect him in 2016. It's almost a counter, why is he doing this? Except that I understand why he's doing this, because it's Trump. He drives it all. He sets the tone, and his staff follows him. He doesn't seem to take advice well.
It's quite a spectacle, and I do wish we were there to follow it on the ground. I'm just for everyone's benefit. I mean, Malcolm and Thomas, Malcolm's reporting is taking place, during a pandemic, and so the rules on interviewing people are quite strict, and that does affect what we can do and the number of people we can bring together in any one place. So thanks for Malcolm for dealing things in difficult circumstances. I'm just going to look ahead to our next few sessions. We have on tomorrow, obviously, we're going to be in Philadelphia. That's at the same time at 10 p.m. UK time, and also at 5 p.m. East Coast time. On Monday, on our Insight series, we are speaking to Ryan Tyson, who's a political strategist and pollster in Florida, and David Rancourt, who is a Republican Party member, looking at the Republican battle there. If Florida doesn't go to the Republicans, that would be significant. So that's another interesting battle to look at there on Monday. On Tuesday, a slight change of things. We'll be speaking to the UK author John Kampfner, and he's just produced a book saying why the Germans do it better, and that's really looking at Britain's sort of political and economic decline. That may wind you up or enthuse you, I don't know. So thanks very much indeed to our speakers there. It's been a really, really good session. I think that I'm encouraging everyone to stay on the line. If Thomas, if you're happy to stay around, if Malcolm, you're happy to stay around for a bit longer, and Dave, what we do now is we encourage people to join our debate. So that's the end of the main session, but we now open up our mics and get more and more people to commentate. So I am going to pick on a few people. People who have joined, who were due to travel in the States at this time, but can't. So I can see Jan Washington's name there. I can see Geraldine Gill, who's been on many a tour. I'd love to get some quotes. And I also want to see if Neil Fleming's microphone works. Neil, can you have another go at talking? Neil, you just open your microphone and see if we can get you to talk. Try and it's the bottom right-hand corner. If you look at the bottom right-hand corner of your screen, see the microphone, the bottom right-hand corner of the bottom left-hand corner of your screen, sorry. No luck, no luck. I'm sorry, Neil, but you're looking great. I'm going to take the next person to the right of you, and that is going to be Geraldine Gill. Geraldine, how are you? You need to unplug your microphone as well. Go ahead, Jerry. Go ahead, Jerry.
Okay, yeah, and I voted.
You've voted already. So tell us where you are. Just give us a bit of a flavor about what's going on in your neighborhood.
I'm in Texas, and I'm in Harris County, where they've only opened up one drop-in voting box for miles and miles and miles. And so I did take advantage of that at Energy Center, which is the old Astrodome, and voted very easily. Everybody's very excited. Harris County is a Democratic-leaning county, as is, Dallas and Austin. So we always get very excited here, but then in the end, it's that other rest of the state. Right.
I mean, there was talk about Texas being in play. I mean, just while you're here, I mean, do you have any sense of, it's leaning Republican, but the idea that Texas could be in play is amazing.
Yeah, and I think we really feel it is. We've never seen so many people vote, stand online to vote, but there's that rest of Texas that we don't see. And then we have the Hispanic population who doesn't vote because of the threat of being found out. We have many illegals here, and even their children who are legal don't vote because they need to protect their parents. Right. So we'll see. I'm hopeful in my lifetime.
Okay, you're hopeful from obviously a Democrat perspective. There may be other people watching this program who have a different perspective.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think we have three kinds of Republicans here, because we have the oil people who are educated. I mean, I have all these friends I can't talk to at dinner. And then we have the pocketbook Republicans here. So, these are people who can't realize that the stock market is different than the economy. They haven't figured that out yet.
Okay. Thank you.
Those are my pearls.
Thank you for that, Jerry. I'm going to bring in Sheila Conroy, who's got a comment, and then I'd love to go back to Caroline Sumnall if we can. So Sheila, go ahead. Good to see you, Sheila. How are you? Just unplug. You need to look at the bottom left-hand side, your microphone, you need to unmute it. There you go.
As my comment said, that I've already voted too in Colorado. They mailed the ballots on Friday. They arrived in my mailbox on Saturday. And on Sunday, I sat down with a gin and tonic and went through this long list. And I've already received an email from Boulder County Election Commission that says they've received my ballot and they're starting to process it. And frankly, here in Colorado, and particularly in the county that I live in, we're amazed and sorry for all the trouble that other states have in voting. I mean, it's here it's so simple and easy and secure, and everybody is thrilled to be voting in this election for obvious reasons, but also because I think we do it very well, and I don't know why everybody else doesn't.
Let's
do
just
it.
get both from Thomas and also from Dave. Let's just get a picture of how postal voting and voting is taking place in both your states. So, Tom, to start with, can you tell us what the situation with postal ballots is?
So, Pennsylvania, prior to 2019, required that you can only vote by mail absentee, and you had to provide an excuse. But the legislature, Republican controlled, working with the governor, passed a statute that opened up mail-in ballots for anyone, for any reason. You could just request a mail-in ballot. That happened in the primary, and the election offices were overwhelmed, and not everyone voted in the primary. So there's a fear, and a very legitimate fear, that for this particular election, when so many Democrats, more Democrats than Republicans, are using mailed ballots, that the system will either break down or move at such a slow pace that we may not have our results tabulated until days after the election. And a court ruling allows ballots that are mailed on election day, as long as they're postmarked on election day, they can be received at the election offices, county election offices, as late as Friday. Anything that comes in after that doesn't get counted. So that wasn't available in the primary. It's very likely that ballots that come in by Friday won't be counted for another week. You know, we could be looking at 10 days before we know the final outcome of the election in Pennsylvania. That's the worst case scenario.
Even presupposing they don't become the subjects of a major court battle as well.
Correct.
Is there something that can prevent that from happening? If it's so clear that Biden or Trump has a very large majority, does that become less of an issue?
If there is an overwhelming vote for Biden, yes, it becomes less of an issue. But this is also in the courts. There hasn't been a decision yet. The Democrats are petitioning that the county election offices be permitted to begin opening the ballots, not counting them, just opening the paper ballots, so that they can sort out all the paper. Pennsylvania has a two-step mail-in ballot. You have to take your ballot, stick it in a security envelope, place that envelope inside the envelope that gets returned, and that gets signed on the outside. If you don't have the security, this is now an issue. If the ballot isn't in the security envelope, it doesn't get counted. That's called a naked ballot. We have terms for everything, right? And the naked ballot doesn't get counted. That's part of the litigation. Should we be counting ballots that are mistakenly placed directly in the envelope that gets returned? All I can say is, if this isn't resolved, then the outcome may not be known. Even if there's an overwhelming Biden vote, Trump may hold out, go to court. God, one of the great fears is that because we don't have an outcome by Friday of that week, the Republican-controlled legislature invalidates the election, the popular vote election, and seats a slate of electors determined by the state legislature, which means 20 electoral votes from Pennsylvania would go towards Trump. That would be an extreme case, but it's been described in an article. It's possible. Whether it's probable, we'll see. But that's a fear. That's a legitimate fear, and there are Democratic lawyers working to thwart that.
Can you just spell out how the state legislature can do that? I mean, how is that, just in terms of the sort of technicalities of it, how are they able to dismiss the Democratic vote and then just make the vote themselves?
So the legislature is ultimately responsible for certifying the outcome of the election. And if the legislature decides that the election's outcome was indeterminate, then the legislature gets to vote for the slate of electors from the state. The last time this happened was in 1876, where there were 4 states, and who needs the history lesson, right? But it did happen. There were disputed sets of electors from 3 states in Oregon that caused the outcome of that election to drag into the end of February, beginning of March, actually, because the president at that point didn't get seated or sworn in until March. and that was settled within the Congress. It was a huge mess, and thankfully we haven't had another incident like that. 2020, the 2000 election came close, but this one would be actually closer to 1876.
And I think, Nick, in answer to your question, I think, and I would defer to Tom on this, but I think the thing is driven by the schedule set out in the Constitution too, because the electors must meet by a date certain. I think that's right, Tom. And then, so if that's the case, and you don't have a resolution in the courts, then you have to have another mechanism by which, you can provide the electors for Pennsylvania to that process. So I think that drives it too.
Amazing. Is that just Pennsylvania? Dave, could the same thing happen in Iowa, or are you familiar with other states that have a similar setup?
Yeah, well, no. Well, the answer is yes and no. It's theoretically possible. Iowa is right now polling as a toss-up state, where we had gone 9 for Trump last time, to nearly everyone's surprise, who thought they knew what they were doing. And what we have here in Iowa is we pride ourselves in the efficiency and effectiveness of our voting procedures. So we don't have some of the dynamics. We don't have a lot of the finger pointing. When somebody makes a mistake voting, it's usually pretty benign. It's not a problem. Our mail-in ballots, I voted. It was at the auditor's office the next day. They notified me, or I could see online that my vote had been received. So things are very, very simple and efficient here. We can early vote in Iowa. Early votes are treated just like mail ballots or absentee ballots. They're not counted until the time certain. We're allowed in Iowa to, the auditors or the voting people are allowed to begin opening those envelopes the weekend of the election, prior to the election, meaning they're allowed to start organizing their information. Everything has to be kept in the secret sleeve, just like Tom talked about. And then they're allowed to start counting them the day before. So they're going to be able to get a good, darn good head start in running those ballots through the machines prior to Tuesday. Now, we had an issue in Iowa where one of our county auditors, they sent out a number of mail-in ballots without the secrecy slate. And then all of a sudden, everybody's up in arms. And then, of course, then they said, well, we know who we sent them to, and we fixed that. And so you send your ballot in, we're going to put a little check mark on it. Didn't have secrecy slate because it was our fault. So we're able to go through and deal with some of those hiccups without it having to be a major disaster or having lawsuits filed. Overall, I don't anticipate those kinds of issues being issues like in Colorado, Wyoming, South Dakota, Nebraska, even Wisconsin and Minnesota. I don't see them being Midwestern plain state issues, but I do see them being issues in some of the states where they have gone way out of their way to make voting difficult for everybody except a select few.
Okay. I won't mention the Democratic primaries and how they were held and organized as a stain upon Iowa's reputation.
No. The caucuses have nothing to do with the election. Caucus is a creature unto itself, and when they messed up, it was all their fault.
Okay. Caroline Sumner, what did you make of that? I mean, I was the prospect of the electors being chosen by the state legislature would be quite something. That was my big shock of the evening. What have you made of it? Caroline, your microphone's there. Are you there? No, I can't. We can't seem to get microphones. So I'm gonna get Graham Fry to come in if he's there. Can you hear me, Graham?
Yeah, I can hear you, Nick. Yeah. That was a revelation for me as well. I didn't realize that it was quite so different between different states, that things could go quite so awry in some places and be completely, as Sheila said, so completely smooth in other places. I guess this is a consequence of such a huge country, divided as it is between states. And I just wondered if you guys had a feel for how that's going to play out across the whole of the US. Is it going to be, are these technical things going to be a real issue when push comes to shove, do you think, during the election?
Malcolm, it is the big fear, isn't it, that this is going to be drawn out for a very long time, and that the hanging chads of Florida will be nothing compared to the turmoil that's going to follow from this.
Yeah, it pretty much all depends. I mean, remember that Florida was a huge debacle, and it was because it all hung in 2000 on Florida. So, you know, yes, if you have a close election and you have a single state where it hinges, the result hinges in that state, then yeah, you're likely to see a giant amount of legal activity. If it's not close nationally, then, you know, it becomes unsustainable for the Republicans to, you know, morally unsustainable for them to have a huge fight if it's a landslide. But yeah, if it's going to be close anywhere. And just talking about the system, you know, there are strengths and weaknesses to it. What we don't appreciate, I'm a British transplant, which I hadn't appreciated, it took me a long time, is that, you know, it really is county by county, the systems here. And, you know, some of them are terribly ineffective and old fashioned. And then other places, it's quite well sorted out. And it's a sort of a strength and the weakness and a weakness of the system, right? So if, for instance, we had a uniform national voting system, then any kind of foreign intervention in that system would be much more threatening. It's so chaotic and disparate here that actually it would be very hard to interfere with the election in the way that people sometimes fear. On the other side, you actually don't need to interfere, say in California, right? Nobody's going to go into California and change tens of millions of votes, because that would be pretty obvious. The problem is that, you know, the result can hinge on tens of thousands of votes in somewhere with not a very good electoral system, which we discovered in Florida in 2000. So, you know, the system may look rickety from the outside and may not be as rickety as it looks, but it might also be, you know, catastrophically flawed depending on circumstances.
Okay, we've got room for one or two more comments, and then we're going to wrap it up there and let the Brits head to bed. Lynn Maddock, just a few thoughts from you. You've always got something interesting to say. Lynn, if you're still there.
Nicholas, I just find a strategy of depriving people of votes, vote suppression, just completely undemocratic. And I wonder how it is justified publicly by the Republicans as a legitimate strategy.
We're going to get into this in North Carolina in quite some way, I think, because that's been an issue there, and to some degree in parts of Virginia, I think. Malcolm, you've been following that a bit. What have been, and also I think maybe Tom as well, there's certainly been court cases that have brought this issue to the fore in terms of voter suppression, making it more difficult also for people to put in postal ballots as well. So maybe start with you, Thomas, and then Malcolm.
So let me just clarify one thing. The situation in Pennsylvania with the legislature not certifying the outcome of the popular vote, that's a national thing. Every state legislature has that opportunity. In the past, it's never been an issue. It's just was done automatically. But Republican strategists have been working with the Republican leaders of the legislature in Pennsylvania as a possible way of throwing the state to Trump. Okay, this was actually captured in an article by a gentleman named Gelman in the Atlantic magazine that it released it to the whole world. That you don't have to be a subscriber, and he uncovered interviews with members of the leadership of the Pennsylvania legislature about this possible outcome or about this possible scenario. So just to make sure everybody understands, it's not Pennsylvania alone that can do that. With regard to voter suppression, I mean, this is what happens when a party can't win the popular vote, right? So the party, in this case, the Republicans, is trying to hold down the votes of people who are likely to vote Democratic. So in the case of Harris County, right, the governor of Texas said 1 drop box to the entire state. We don't have drop boxes in Pennsylvania, right? I mean, well, I shouldn't say it that way. We are temporarily allowed to have some drop boxes. Some counties are putting a lot out, and in our county, a few. We cannot vote early in the state. You can request an absentee ballot and take it down, and it becomes a kind of early vote, but there's no polling station set up in a way that one can go and actually cast a vote early, right? So that's a form of voter suppression, and that was there was an effort, I should say, to try to get early voting in the state, but that didn't happen. So as someone who has read and written about voting and elections in this country, I am very frustrated by what's happened over the last 5 or 6 or 8 years to actually work to suppress the turnout of voters of all kinds in this country. It's very, very frustrating.
But in terms of how it's justified, it's often portrayed as a reasonable security measure. So for instance, you mandate that people bring their driver's licenses. It sounds, on the face of it, relatively uncontroversial. Of course, you should request that people demonstrate that they are who they say they are, using a pretty secure form of identification, which the US driver's license is. But people on the other side will say that that unfairly disenfranchises a particular segment of the population that has less access to, driver's license, and oftentimes, fewer ballot boxes, fewer places to vote, disenfranchises effectively people who don't have transport. So, but it's presented as, election security measures. So that's the way it's justified.
Right. Well, that's a very pessimistic overview. We'll be continuing discussion, talking more about that in the next few programs as we go through the next 5 counties that we've got to look at. As I say, it's Philadelphia tomorrow, and then we are into Virginia, where we're in Fairfax County and Fauquier County. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Fauquier, there you go. And then we're going to be in North Carolina in Chapel Hill and Wilkes County. Thank you very much indeed, Thomas. That's been a really, really wonderful contribution from you, and also from Dave Swenson there in Iowa. It's been a great discussion. Please do join us again, everyone, tomorrow at 10 p.m. UK time, at 5 p.m. East Coast time. Until then, goodbye.